Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy. And in today's video, I'm bringing you guys a 12-team standard mock draft from the 3rd overall spot on Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard. Now, in this video, I'm going to be talking about my picks, as well as the picks surrounding where I'm going to be talking about how I feel about those picks, how I feel about how the draft is going, as well as how I feel that I want to build my team during this mock draft. And I pretty much draft like this was a real league. I don't just draft and say, hey, let me take this guy here, let me take that guy here, just for no reason. No, I want to make this shit seem as real as possible so you guys can get into my head and how I feel during an actual draft scenario. So like I said, 12-team standard draft from the 3rd overall position. The roster positions are 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wideouts, a tight end, flex, kicker, defense, and 6 bench spots. We're drafting on Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard, so we're going up against the computer to make it go a bit faster, which makes it an even better video. And we're going up against ESPN's pre-draft ranking. So before I get into the actual mock draft, please make sure that you guys go down below and click that subscribe button, because if at any point you end up enjoying, that is going to be the key to winning your 2020 Fantasy Football Championship. I put out content every single day to help you guys dominate your league, so you're not going to want to miss out on that, as well as checking out my Patreon with my draft guide on there as well. So we got CMC, Saquon Barkley to start off the draft. Very typical beginning of a draft, standard PPR, half PPR. It doesn't matter. It's pretty much Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley every single time, unless you're drafting with some dumbasses who want to draft Mahomes or Lamar Jackson first, which is something you do not want to do. Now here, obviously, we have the 3rd pick, and it's really between, like, 2 or 3 guys at this pick. This is a standard league, so there is actually kind of the thought that you may want to go Derrick Henry here. Now, Derrick Henry, obviously, in a PPR league, can't really hold the candle to Zeke, but he probably actually could finish higher than Zeke. That wouldn't surprise me at all. Even with the little pass-catching volume that Derrick Henry is going to get, it won't matter at all because of just how many rushing yards he gets. He could be the rushing yard leader. Again, back-to-back years in the NFL. That would not surprise me at all. Here, it's between Zeke, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. Pretty much really a race between 2 guys of Zeke and Derrick Henry. It's really pick your poison here. I'm going to go with Ezekiel Elliott, though, of the Dallas Cowboys. I personally have him ranked higher, but I would not judge you if you went with Derrick Henry here at that 3 spot. I think that Ezekiel Elliott's in for another fantastic year on an offense that is going to be scoring a zillion points, which is obviously good for the running back, because if they're ahead in the game, they're going to be able to run the rock down the stretch of the game, and I think that Ezekiel Elliott is going to be fantastic yet again in 2020. I'd be very surprised if him, Saquon, CMC, Derrick Henry, or Alvin Kamara were really busts in a standard league, unless they were to get hurt, obviously. That's the only way I could really see them busting. So, after we went with Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook came off the board, followed by Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, Miles Sanders, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Aaron Jones, Julio Jones, Travis Kelce, Austin Eckler, and Chris Godwin. Now, my strategy in a standard league is to really just attack 2 running backs off the rip, at least 2 in the first 3 rounds. It's my strategy in all leagues, but it's even more true in a standard league because the running back position is just even more important. Even in non-PPR leagues, you can find wide receivers later that you feel comfortable starting. So I would go ahead and try to make sure that I got at least 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. I don't really understand the thought process in picking Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams ahead of a guy like Derrick Henry, who could legitimately carry your team all the way to the championship on his back by running the ball so many times in a standard league. That approach is even more confusing when picking Devontae Adams there, when in the 2nd round you go ahead and snag Julio Jones, when there were other running backs available that were very capable to join your roster. Doing 2 wide receiver in a standard league back-to-back, to me, just really does not make all that much sense, considering it's really a boost in a PPR league because, hey, they're getting so many receptions. They're super safe. Technically, they're super safe in a PPR league, whereas in standard, they're obviously going to be slightly more volatile because a guy who's going to catch the ball a zillion times isn't necessarily as good because they don't get the point for catching that ball a zillion goddamn times. So now it's time to draft either a running back or a wide receiver at this pick, and we're probably going to have to go wide receiver at this 3 spot. That's why I kind of prefer to draft in the back half of the 1st round. I just think here, your 1st round pick, obviously Ezekiel Elliott is going to be amazing for our roster. The problem is our 2nd round pick, the running backs really just fall off a goddamn cliff, so it's kind of a shit show in the 2nd round. Obviously, you could go tight end, you could go quarterback, but that really goes against the grain of my draft strategy. I typically don't go quarterback early due to the fact that I think you can find one late for better value than you're drafting here, because say we don't draft, or should I say we do draft a quarterback here, then say our running back 2 or our wide receiver 1 is going to be significantly worse, even though we could have probably just found a quarterback here, down here later in the draft that is going to be very capable of dominating for us. For tight end, it's more of just a feel kind of thing. I feel like in a 12-team league, the value at the position is just much lower. So if this was a 10-team league or an 8-team league, I personally would be more likely to draft one of those kind of players earlier, in my opinion. I just think that the positional value is much stronger in an 8 or 10-team league, since every team is kind of stacked. Now in a 12-team league, every team is pretty good, but there's obviously guys who are going to be dumbasses and make mistakes, and then their team is going to be much worse, and then the positional advantage really doesn't matter as much, in my opinion, because when every team is stacked, you want to make sure you're stacked at the one position that is much harder to get stacked at, which is tight end. So now looking at wide receivers or running backs here, I mean, Chris Carson's still available, which is a fine pick. I don't love him that much this year, though. I think he'll be fine, though. Gurley, James Conner, Leonard Fournette, Jonathan Taylor, all still available at wide receiver. Galladay, Evans, Brown, Robinson, Thielen, Odell, all still available. So a lot of wide receivers, not a lot of running backs, because that's pretty typical. The first 2 rounds of every single draft are very heavily dominated by the running back position. So here we're going to go running back. We're going to say, fuck it, let's get that running back. And we're going to go with my main man, Leonard Fournette of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, a lot of people have completely sold their soul off on Leonard Fournette. I was so off of Leonard Fournette last year, right? I'm thinking, oh, this guy's kind of an off-the-field problem, right? Not even off the field problem, on the field problem. Like, he didn't show up to team pictures one year, gets fucking benched for a couple games, then he has a fight against the Bills, right? But then last year, he's as clean as a goddamn whistle. He's just over there having great fucking games, top 10 running back, and now people are fading him, which I don't understand, especially in standard where the targets don't matter as much, considering I think his target share is going to go down. He had like 100 targets last season. That's going to go down because they added Chris Thompson. But in a standard league, I'll happily draft Leonard Fournette in the second round here. Sure, it's kind of a reach. We may have been able to get him inside of the third round, but I wanted to make sure that I got the running back that I wanted, and that is exactly what I did there in the second round. So after we went ahead and drafted Leonard Fournette, Mike Evans came out the board, followed by George Kittle, Kenny Galladay, and DJ Moore. So very typical that we see 2 of the big 2 tight ends come off the board, both of them inside of the second round. Sometimes you see them fall all the way to the third round, but that's probably the farthest they will go. If they fall into the fourth round, to me, even in a 12-team league, that's just an insta-lock because the value there is just so strong in the fourth round. So now we could still go. Both the big 2 quarterbacks of Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes are still available. Will I do that? Fuck no. I'm not about the running back, or I'm not about the quarterback train early, but if they were to fall into the fourth round, I would probably go ahead and make that move and scoop them up there. So now we already have our 2 running backs. I feel pretty confident at the running back position. Sure, you could load up with a third one, but I feel like one I can get in the third round will be just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and go with a wide receiver here. Now, A.J. Brown is actually a curious case here in a standard league to be drafted much higher than I would normally draft him, due to the fact that last season, the guy, he's not a fucking target hog. Obviously, he didn't get 100 targets, but he's a guy that got over 1,000 yards, but the 100 targets obviously could be there due to the fact that at the beginning of the year, he wasn't really a starter at all when Marquise Mariota was playing quarterback, and then once Ryan Tannehill stepped up, then he was balling out 20 yards per reception, which is a very high number, but if you're getting that high of yards per reception, you don't need that many targets to be dominant. It's pretty confusing there. Not really confusing, just a nice breakdown there, but I don't think I'm going to go A.J. Brown. I'd much rather go with Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears, one of my favorite players inside of the third round. I love Allen Robinson. We've seen what he's done in Jacksonville with a bad quarterback with Blake Bortles. He's just a fucking beast. And then he goes to, obviously, Chicago with another bad quarterback in Kiss and Titties Mitch Trubisky, and he's a beast. So what do we do now with a better quarterback? You would think in 9-inch Nick Foles, you would think he'd be even better. So I do love Allen Robinson a lot inside of the third round. After we went with Allen Robinson, it was a wide receiver run of Adam Thielen first, then Amari Cooper, Juju Smith-Schuster, Cortland Sutton, Odell Beckham Jr., A.J. Brown, and Calvin Ridley. So that is, you can count it, 10 wide receivers in a row. The first 2 rounds heavily dominated by running back. The rounds 3, 4, and 5 is where you're going to be seeing a bunch of wide receivers fall off the board. So notice after the Calvin Ridley, or the wide receiver run ended with Calvin Ridley, we see Lamar Jackson come off the board. So first quarterback of the draft at the 311. I think that is kind of late. Now that's great value for Lamar Jackson. I just don't think that I would personally pick him there, but I'm just saying I don't think that that's where he's normally going to go. I think he normally goes in the second or third round, but that's really or earlier in the third round than that, or at the end of the second round, due to the fact that a lot of people like to snag their quarterback early that are less enthused with fantasy football. They're not as like balls deep in it like you are. You're fucking watching a video on the internet. of someone talking about it, so you clearly like it, and maybe the other person just isn't as into it. So they draft Lamar Jackson earlier because he's the big name. In real life, the quarterback position is the most important. In fantasy football, in a one quarterback league, it's not even like the third most important thing. So you never know. Or that not even you never know. I do know. I'm just saying I don't know how important a lot of people grade them. So after that ramble went on there for like about no reason at all, after Lamar Jackson, we saw Chris Carson followed by Pat Mahomes. So the big two quarterbacks that I'm going at the 3-4 turn, which is not very that much surprising at all, to be fair, like I said before, because a lot of people like to take the quarterback early, but they fell a bit here. So, a little bit of a different approach to the draft as of normal when you typically see them go around the second and third round. After Mahomes, we saw David Johnson, Tyler Lockett, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Mark Andrews, Todd Gurley, Zach Ertz, and Le'Veon Bell. So after the big two tight ends go in the second round, we saw the other kind of tight ends that people are a big fan of. Ertz and Andrews go in the fourth round. I'm a huge fan of Ertz. Not of Ertz. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Mark Andrews. Not a huge fan of Zach Ertz. I think Zach Ertz will be fine. I just think Mark Andrews has top 3 potential. Could legit be the number 1 tight end. Whereas I really don't see that in the books for Mr. Zach Ertz. Now, other picks there that I thought were nice and interesting. Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp going back-to-back. Michael Jordan, 96, 97. Interesting that Woods goes ahead of Kupp now in a lot of drafts. Personally, I like Woods more than Kupp as well, so I don't think that's really too interesting, but I didn't perceive the public to think that Woods would be better than Kupp due to the fact that Kupp is the wide receiver 1 of the team, or the one that most people perceive as that. Odell Beckham Jr., just an absolute waste of a pick in the third round. I'd rather play Russian roulette with the bullets, and there was just 6 bullets in there, and one that was, maybe, how many bullets are in a revolver? I think it's 6, so maybe 5. There are 5 bullets, and the one is you don't die. That's what I'd rather do in the draft, Odell Beckham Jr., because he's just a absolute waste of a pick. So now here, looking at our pick, the running backs and wide receivers here, or the running backs have really fallen off. That's why I'm glad that I approached with the 2 running backs early. But now I will happily get my running back 3 here, since I think that there is one guy here who is not a part of the really super duper falling off train here, and that is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm a huge fan of Jonathan Taylor out of college. This guy was an absolute beast at Wisconsin, and now he's going to get the opportunity to become the running back 1 of the Colts. Now, it may not happen week 1, may not happen week 2, it probably will happen by week 4 that he will be the guy getting a zillion touches out of the backfield. He's also a guy that can catch passes out of the backfield, which is obviously very good, running up behind the number 1 offensive line graded by Pro Football Focus in Indianapolis. So I think Jonathan Taylor is really going to have a fantastic year in 2020. I'm not sure I would start him week 1. I'd probably look elsewhere at the flex spot, but I do think a couple of weeks in, there's a 100%, or not a 100% chance, but there's a likely chance that he's a top 12 running back on a week-to-week basis once he is given the reins of that offense. So I love Jonathan Taylor here in the 4th round. I really think Phillip Rivers is there to make sure that the offense can contain itself and so that they can run the goddamn ball. They wore those hats last year. Jacoby Brissett had a hat on that said run the damn ball. That's what they're going to do. That's how the Colts win games, because their offensive line is so goddamn good. After Jonathan Taylor, we see Melvin Gordon followed by James Conner, DeAndre Swift, and Devin Singletary. Another interesting thing, Marlon Mack's been an 1,000-yard rusher behind that line. They've just had a great line for years, and now it is even better. It is the number 1 line, and now they have one of the best running backs coming out of college, and one of the better running backs, in my opinion, in the NFL in Jonathan Taylor. And then a bunch of running backs came off the board. A nice running back run there. Le'Veon Bell, Jonathan Taylor, Melvin Gordon, James Conner, DeAndre Swift, and Devin Singletary, all a part of that. Not a huge fan of Devin Singletary personally. I just think that this team is going to be one of those teams where it's not necessarily running back by committee, because a committee to me is where there's a shit ton of running backs there, a zillion guys getting the ball, whereas this is more of a 2-headed monster type of backfield of Devin Singletary and James Conner, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, which is going to hurt both of them, but it hurts Devin Singletary too much to be worthy of a 5th round pick, considering Zach Moss is already sniffing up there looking for that starting job, and I personally believe he could take it based off of the reports in camp. And all it would take is one freak injury to Devin Singletary, one false step, the guy hurts his leg, he's out for a game, and then out of nowhere Zach Moss is the starting running back. That is entirely possible to happen, considering how explosive Moss has looked in training camp versus how not so hot Singletary has looked. He's had fumbling issues throughout camp, so I really do like avoiding Devin Singletary inside of the 5th round. So now our first 4 picks of the draft were Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, Allen Robinson, and Jonathan Taylor. So a nice approach to the draft, 3 running backs and 1 wide receiver, typically something that I really like to do in my drafts. So now we're in the 5th round, and if you guys have enjoyed this video thus far, please make sure to click that subscribe button down below. It's free, like I said at the beginning of the video, and I put out content every single goddamn day to help you guys win. And don't forget, during the season, I'm still going to be here making videos every single day as well to help you guys out. So now we're looking at running back or wide receiver. Sure, Dak Prescott is available, and that is a perfectly fine 5th round pick, but I prefer to wait later on quarterback. There's still some tight ends available, but in my philosophy is really if Kittle, Kelsey, and Mark Andrews are gone, I just really pivot and wait till later to draft a tight end. I'm not all about that middle round tight end lifestyle. So now it is time to go either running back or wide receiver. Mark Ingram is still available, followed by Raheem Mostert, David Montgomery for running backs, but we are kind of on the other side of the turn where we're going to be waiting a while, so a lot of those guys are probably going to be gone if we don't go for them. Cam Akers, Ronald Jones, Kareem Hunt, maybe some of those guys may be available, so I think we're going to go ahead here and just wait until the next round to draft another running back and go onto the wide receiver train here at the 503. So to me, the pick here is Terry McLaurin. It's really between McLaurin, Metcalf, and Chark, as well as Stephon Diggs here. Some very safe picks there in Chark, Metcalf, and McLaurin, and Diggs, in my opinion. I think all these guys are going to be very safe in 2020. I don't really see any of those guys really having a bust year, considering a lot of these teams are going to be throwing the ball a lot. Now, Buffalo, obviously, might be more of a run, not a run-heavy approach, but more likely to run the ball than a team like Jacksonville or Washington. Obviously, DK Metcalf on a run-heavy team as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not safe just because they don't throw the ball as much. They are going to still have a lot of opportunity to get the ball. For me, I love McLaurin due to the fact that I think the Washington football team will get better with Ron Rivera. I think Dwayne Haskins is going to take that next step up, that upper echelon move to become that guy in Washington So I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin in his 2nd year in the NFL as the Washington football team's #1 wide receiver, but I would not argue going Chark, going Metcalf, or going Stephon Diggs at that pick. I really think you can go either way inside of the 5th round right there. So now we are moving on to the 6th round of the draft, and we're probably going to hope that some running backs fall to us, but I highly doubt they may end up, since a lot of running backs have been flying off the board. Interesting enough, actually, one of those picks is something I actually want to talk about when we get to it. So after one was scary, Terry McLaurin, T.Y. Hilton came off the board, followed by Keenan Allen, David Montgomery, Cam Akers, Raheem Mostert, DK Metcalf, Ronald Jones, Mark Ingram, DJ Chark, Devontae Parker, Jarvis Landry, Darren Waller, Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, Kareem Hunt, Kerryon Johnson, Stephon Diggs, and Dak Prescott. So after we saw Lamar and Pat Mahomes, there was a nice lull for a round, and then 3 quarterbacks go inside of the 6th round, which is not all that surprising because this typically happens at the quarterback position. There's going to be a wait after Lamar and Pat Mahomes, and then someone's going to pick Deshaun, they're going to pick Dak, they're going to pick Kyler, maybe they pick Russell Wilson, and then out of nowhere, a bunch of other quarterbacks will come off the board because a lot of people get scared that the quarterback position will fall off and they won't get the guy they want, so they just go ahead and reach up and pick one, which is great for us because we're not going to draft a quarterback here. We saw the run happen. We can go ahead and snag a running back. We can snag a wide receiver at much better value because people started taking quarterbacks, and since there are going to be better value at the running back and wide receiver because of the fact that the quarterbacks are going off the board, so it makes the running backs and wide receivers fall later. I would not be surprised at all if after we don't go quarterback here, that another couple of quarterbacks do come off the board before the 7th round comes to a close. Looking at QB, obviously we're not going to pick one. Russell Wilson is still available, so I'd honestly be very shocked if he does not even come off the board. If these guys don't have a quarterback, I think he might go in the picks after our most recent pick and before our next pick in the 7th round. So now it's time to go ahead and snag either a running back or a wide receiver. We're probably going to go running back here since the running back train is really falling off at this point. James White's one of my favorite one of my favorite middle round running backs, but this is standard. This is not PPR, and James White gets his points from catching the ball. It's not really from being that dominant of a rusher or anything. Obviously, he's still good at doing that, but his points come from the PPR aspect of the game. So we're going to go Jordan Howard here in the 6th round. Maybe somewhat of a reach, but I do love Jordan Howard a lot this season. I really think we see him have an excellent season in 2020 in Miami. Now, an excellent season for Jordan Howard. It doesn't mean he's going to get like 1,400 fucking rushing yards, score 18 touchdowns or something crazy. No, he'll probably get a modest, maybe 1,000+ yards, considering he has been a 1,000-yard rusher before in the NFL. So it would not really come to a surprise to me, at least, if he's able to do that, especially if the Miami Dolphins are as good as I believe they potentially could be. Now, I'm a Dolphins fan, so I'm not projecting them to win 9 fucking games. I think they can win 8 games, and if they are winning 8 games, I think Jordan Howard could play pretty good. Now, obviously, this isn't a PPR league, so it's not as much of a concern, but Jordan Howard has absolute stone hands, so he doesn't really catch any passes, so Matt Breida is going to be doing that for the Dolphins, but I think Jordan Howard could get over 1,000 yards, and as my running back 4 in a standard league, I could have done far much worse than what I ended up here with, and just like predicted, granted, Russell Wilson did come off the board in between our 6th and 7th round selections. So after we went Jordan Howard, Russell Wilson came off the board, followed by AJ Green, Michael Gallup, and Phillip Lindsay. Lindsey's also one of those players that I like to draft in the later rounds, since I'm not too bought in on the fact that Melvin Gordon's going to be the true workhorse there of the Broncos, and if he was to go down, you would definitely be getting a solid option out of Phillip Lindsay later in the draft. So now it's time to go ahead and snag up on some more running backs and wide receivers. I don't think we could go Josh Allen yet. I mean, we could. Obviously, the 7th round is probably the price you're going to have to pay for Josh Allen, but I'd much rather wait and just snag a guy later. So here we're going to go with wide receiver. We already got Robinson. We already got Mr. Terry McLaurin. So now we're going to go ahead and add a bit of spice to the room and draft Hollywood Brown. Now, I have Tyler Boyd ranked higher, but that doesn't mean that I can't go ahead and reach up a little bit and get Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown is a guy that I think is a super high octane play that you just throw into your fucking roster, and he could completely boom a week for you. He's a guy that could score 25 plus points on a given game due to the fact that the Baltimore Ravens offense is so explosive and he is such a fast player on the team. So I'm going to go ahead and draft him. Still the wide receiver one of the team. In my opinion, Mark Andrews is still Lamar Jackson's favorite target, but that doesn't mean Hollywood Brown can't be good in the 7th round. I think he's definitely a solid pick here. Not to be a starting wide receiver, but to be a guy that I could find in a good matchup that I can throw into my roster that can really help me win on that week and probably a bunch of weeks during the season when I think he has a good matchup. And it's going to be a lot of good matchups when you play on the goddamn Ravens. So after we drafted Mr. Hollywood Brown, Tyler, Boyd came off the board, followed by Matt Ryan, Tom Brady, Carson Wentz, Will Fuller, Deebo Samuel, Josh Allen, Marvin Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Tevin Coleman, Deontay Johnson, Brandon Cooks, Zach Moss, Jameson Crowder, Tariq Cohen, Matt Breida, Alexander Madison, and Julian Edelman. So, like I said, a quarterback run ended up happening inside the 7th round. All those quarterbacks going up ahead of Josh Allen to me doesn't really make all that much sense, but that's just me. I don't really get drafting Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz ended up getting hurt today in practice. Now, he should be fine, just a minor setback. But hey, that's something we obviously worry about with Carson Wentz since he's been injury prone in the past. I love Zach Moss, like I said earlier, with Devin Singletary. I just don't think he's going to be that full-on workhorse back there in Buffalo, which would obviously heavily benefit Mr. Zach Moss. Now we're going to go ahead here and start drafting some more running backs and wide receiver. The quarterbacks have really came off the board. The running backs have really started to fall off the board now. There's not really any guys that are really calling out to me as like some very, very good picks here in the 8th round. So I'd probably go ahead and just draft some more wide receivers here, probably in the 8th round. Unless I want to just draft Drew Brees and lock up my quarterback position. It is entirely possible that this guy takes a quarterback. Everyone else has a quarterback besides me and team number 1. So it is actually be best from my standpoint to draft a quarterback here, since if I don't take Brees, he probably won't come back to me in the next round. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. Draft Drew Brees. Now, I like him and Stafford a lot, but I do have Drew Brees ranked 1 tier ahead of him. I just don't really worry about injury concerns with Drew Brees, whereas with Matthew Stafford, I could see it being entirely possible that he ends up getting hurt again, since he's dealt with back injuries 2 years in a row now. So now it's time to go ahead and draft some more running backs and wide receivers, because we're probably going to wait another round or 2 on tight end, depending on where Hayden Hurst is on the screen. He's still down there. He's the guy we pick in pretty much every draft, and if we don't end up getting him, we'll just draft another late round tight end, since I feel like there's a lot of guys late with a decent amount of value that I think could finish inside of the top 12 at the position, and finishing as top 12 tight end is not even all that hard, so it's pretty easy to kind of find a guy that's going to be able to do that. So after we went Drew Brees, Evan Ingram came off the board, followed by Christian Kirk, Darrell Henderson, and Sterling Shepard. Now we're kind of stuck in a spot where it's pretty difficult here. We already have we have 1, 2, 3, 4 running backs. We have 3 wide receivers. We got a quarterback. We don't have a tight end, but I just feel like this pick is not worthy of a tight end. We're not picking another quarterback. So it's really kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here, because a lot of the running backs that are still available, I just don't love all that much. I mean, I may just end up taking James White, even though I think he's much better in PPR, just as a safe pick in case one of these guys was to go down, that I could somehow play him. Now, I don't know if that's the best move, because I don't know if he's not really all that good in standard. So it'd probably be better to just draft a wide receiver here and then hope that another running back later falls to me that I think might have some nice upside in a guy like Antonio Gibson, or maybe Duke Johnson, Boston Scott, Chase Edmonds, maybe some guys that are handcuffs, but could be very helpful to me. So we're going to go wide receiver here, and we're going to go with Mr. Where's he at? He's all the way down here. They put him way too deep down here. That's Mr. Mecole Hardman. Now, Mecole Hardman is kind of... Wait, where is he? He's up here. He's one of those guys that, just like Hollywood Brown, are those guys that you throw into your roster as just absolute boom pieces to your team. Now I have two of those. I have one on one of the best offenses in the AFC, and then I have another one on one of the best offenses in the AFC. So I don't know. I just think that that's something I might want to do later in my drafts or later rounds of my drafts, because I feel like it gives me a whole lot of upside with the team, and I'm not really picking a guy that's super safe just for the sake of it in the 9th round. So after we went with McCole Hardman, Golden Tate came off the board, followed by Darius Slayton, Robbie Anderson, Latavius Murray, Tyler Higbee, John Brown, Henry Ruggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Marlon Mack, Mike Williams, Preston Williams, James White, Jerry Jeudy, Tony Pollard, Keyshawn Vaughn, Adrian Peterson, Duke Johnson, and Brashad Perryman. So now, since Tyler Higbee went, we probably have to go tight end. I want to go ahead and snag my boy Hayden Hurst. He's on the most pass-heavy offense in the NFL. The Atlanta Falcons, they use the tight end heavily, so it would make sense to draft the tight end on a team that uses a tight end heavily. So we went ahead there and got Mr. Hayden Hurst. After we went ahead and selected Mr. Hayden Hurst, Curtis Samuel came off the board, followed by Justin Jackson, and then Justin Jefferson and Antonio Gibson. So now it's time to go ahead and add some running backs. Sadly, Antonio Gibson did end up going, but we could still go ahead here and get Mr. Damian Harris, who I think might end up becoming the starting running back of the New England Patriots. Now, I do think Sony Michel might have a chance if he's actually healthy. Now, he's off the PUP, the physically unable to participate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's 100% in practice. No reports have came out and said that he looks 100%, and a guy with arthritis knee, not sure you really want to be drafting that. So after we went with Damian Harris, Hunter Henry came off the board, followed by Boston Scott, Deshaun Jackson, A.J. Dillon, Jared Cook, Jalen Reagor, C.D. Lamb, Chase Edmonds, Chris Herndon, Anthony Miller, Rob Gronkowski, Matthew Stafford, Noah Fant, Paris Campbell, Brandon Ayuk, Aaron Rodgers, Sammy Watkins, and Naheem Hines. Now, I don't draft 2 quarterbacks in 12-team leagues because I feel like you can just find one off the waiver wire. Same thing goes with 2 tight ends. So our last spots are going to be running back and wide receiver. So here, you know what we're going to do? We're going to snag up the whole Patriots backfield and draft Sony Michel for any of the guys that are going to potentially run the ball in that offense. I think that's a perfectly sound strategy late. We handcuff our own bench play to make sure that we got all of this Patriots offense, because it's either going to be Michel or Harris. In my opinion, I don't think they're really going to be both getting enough touches to want to start both of them at the same time. So that's why we went with Sony Michel there in the 12th round. After we went with Damian Harris and Sony Michel, it's time to now draft a wide receiver here with our last pick. And there's a bunch of guys you can go with. You can go with Pittman, you can go with Harry, you can go with Lazard, you can go with Chenault. There's a bunch of guys late that I like a decent amount, but here we're going to go with Lazard of the Green Bay Packers and hope he is the wide receiver too. Now, I don't think he's going to get an immense amount of volume, but hey, a wide receiver playing with one of the best quarterbacks in the game in Aaron Rodgers is obviously good, but obviously since they run the ball so much, that's also kind of concerning. But he did good last year when given the opportunity, and now that MVS and Geronimo Allison are pretty much out of the fucking equation, we could see Allen Lazard have a great year. So after we went with Lazard, Jamal Williams came out the board, followed by Lamar Miller, Rashad Penny, Big Ben, Josh Kelly, Jerick McKinnon, Rock Armstead, Darrington Evans, a defense, and then N'Keal Harry, and then a bunch of defenses. So no one drafted defense early, which is good, because you don't want to draft the defense early because it supremely fucks up the value at the other spots of your team. So now we're going to go ahead and draft our defense and kicker. First, we're going to go with kicker Harrison Butker, the fucker, in the 14th round. I have a kicker rankings video if you guys want to check that out to go a little bit more in depth on the kickers. And then for defense, you want to draft a defense playing a shitty offense week 1. Or not a shitty offense, just an offense you perceive to have a hard type of schedule. So, or not even a hard schedule, just a hard week 1. And we got the Chargers going up against the Bengals, and the Bengals are not going to be ultra good week 1 because they're playing with a rookie quarterback with no preseason. So I think Joe Burrow gets a bit flustered in his first game up against a tough defense in the Chargers. Then you cut the Chargers and add new defense for week numero 2. So to recap our roster, we got quarterback Drew Brees. Our running backs are Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette. We got Al Robinson and Terry McLaurin as our starting wide receivers. Our starting tight end is Hayden Hurst. Our flex is Jonathan Taylor. Our defense is the Chargers, and our kicker is Harrison Butker. Our bench is comprised of Jordan Howard, Hollywood Brown, McCole Hardman, Damian Harris, Sony Michel, and Allen Lazard. So let me know down below if you guys ended up enjoying. Please make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Please make sure to check out the Patreon as well. I love each and every single one of you guys, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with yet another banger of a video. Goodbye!